And during this session, today what I want to talk to you about is how to attack your opponent's king. So we have a game that was already played, and in this game you'll notice that black is a little ahead in development simply because his rooks are communicating. That means that all of his pieces are developed except for this rook right here. He's in a castle position. He's got a good stake in the center, even though I believe white has a better stake in the center. Black has a fee and kettle bishop attempting to control this entire diagonal. And he's expanding on the queen side. So black has a good position. It looks like a hedgehog in the respect that all of his positions are on the 7th rank. There are some positions that black can play where all of his positions are on, most of his pieces are on the 7th rank. That is called a hedgehog. It's usually a defensive position. And the reason it's called a hedgehog is because usually white will get frustrated because white can't attack black the way that white likes to. When he does, he makes a move that is not necessarily a sound move. And at the end of the battle, at the end of the struggle, black's pawn structure is usually okay, and black can go on to win. And that's why it's called a hedgehog. Now for white, white has a king and a fee, castle king, fee and kettle position, rook and queen on the same file, but the bishop is preventing the rooks from communicating, so white is slightly behind in development. However, white has a good stake in the center, and one of white's last moves is a4 to try to undermine this pawn. Hopefully this pawn will take here and he can bring the rook across, is what I think he would try to do. Now we've gone 11 moves into the game, but the purpose for the lesson is how to attack your opponent's king. Now I want to show you how both sides are going to use their knights and the bishops to battle on this flank, the king side flank of the board. Now remember, this is the king side flank and this is the queen side flank. Sometime, and as we all know, the key to a good chess game is in the center of the board. But sometimes the center becomes locked down, and it becomes neutral, or locked down, and it becomes stagnant. If it's stagnant, then nobody's able to get through, nobody's able to really maneuver in the center, but it's the most important part of the board. So what you have to do is you have to, in order to create activity in the center, what you have to do is you have to use the flank to undermine your opponent's center. And sometimes like say if a pawn is here and you put a pawn here and he takes that pawn, well that gives you the ability to move this pawn forward, which is hitting a valuable square. So those are the kinds of things that you want to be mindful of. Now let's remember that black will be attacking white's king here, but in this position what white will do is use his pawns and his knights and his pieces and his queen to come straight up the board and just to attack black's king. Now white's king will be left alone, and that can be very, very dangerous. But at the same time, there's a time that you have to do what you have to do to win, and we'll see how the game turns out. The last move for black was to castle, and in this instance, white does h4. What he's doing is he's going to start to attack black's king. After you fight for the center, after you develop your pieces, after you open up the square so that this guy can get out when you want him to, after you castle, then you can begin to attack, but not before then, unless your opponent makes a mistake. All right, in this move, black moves rook at A to B8 to protect his bishop, realizing that if the queen's out of the way and maybe this knight could attack the queen, then that bishop may be able to clip that bishop for free. Fee and kettle bishops can be tricky like that. You have to watch out for fee and kettle bishops. Next move for white is knight at 1 to h2 to begin to work and control different squares. And black does h5 so that this knight cannot go to that square. And then white responds by going knight to g5, and then black does knight to e5. Now I love when people put a piece right here on e5 in this kind of a position, simply because it allows you to gain tempo by moving, because now you're saying, okay, you've got to move him from there, and I'm expanding at the same time. So the purpose is to undermine the center and control the center, and to attack his king at the same time. So by moving here, now we're expanding, creating space for the pieces to maneuver easily, and at the same time, we're one step closer to getting to his king. So he moves his knight to g4. And then white says, okay, well, if you go there, I'm going to take this, I'm going to take that, you take back, I take that, that knight takes, and then white would take and win one pawn, and this pawn would not be there, and that would be the avenue that you would need to use to get to his king. So black is too smart for that, so black says, no thank you. Knight captures. Oh, I'm sorry, that's not what happened. What black does is pawn captures over here, and then rook captures, and then knight takes h2, king takes h2. Remember, your king has authority, so sometimes you need to capture with your king. Next move is g6 to protect that pawn. So now it appears that black can't get into his camp. I'm sorry, it appears that white can't get into black's camp. It looks like black has good safety, but watch how black's position begins to fall apart. Next move for white is b3 to create a way for, well actually, to create a way for this bishop to get into the game here and control that diagonal. That can be a key to it. And at the same time, if black says, well, no, I'm not going to allow that fianchetto bishop to attack me here, I'm going to move his pawn forward, then you take this pawn and move it up forward and start attacking him here. Once these pawns become disconnected and backwards, then his position will fall apart completely. So we're focusing on how we're going to dismantle black's pieces here to get to his king. And white is going to use his pieces to do that. Next move for black is bishop to c6 to chase the rook away. That's actually a mistake. Number one, why? Because he's giving away a pawn for free. So rook captures a6. And those pawns make a difference. And then black says, okay, I'll go here. Queen of b7 to threaten the rook. Now, when I was younger, I would have moved the rook here or here. But sometimes it's best just to put the rook back home. See, because now if it's at home, the rook won't be attacked unnecessarily, and then you have to move him again. At least if the rook comes over, you can just take the rook. Or if you want to keep the file, which is probably the best move, you just move the bishop here. Then if he takes your rook, you move your rook over. Then your bishop is working on this diagonal, and then your rook will be working on that file. Rooks are meant for open files. Bishops are meant for open diagonals, right? Next move is e5, just as we hoped, to try to create some activity and keep his pawn structure good. However, look at this, right? Consider, is this bishop good or bad? That bishop is a very bad bishop. This bishop is pretty bad too. But he's trying to get scope. But this bishop is terrible. So if you have white, you don't have to try to take this bishop yet. He's no threat to you. Sometimes if there was a knight here, some people would just take the bishop and that would really be doing black a favor, because he's really doing you no harm. Next move for white is g4. Now if black takes, then bishop takes, and then if black captures here, that does white three favors. Number one, he can capture a piece and develop a bishop at the same time. He can connect his rooks. That bishop would be attacking the center, so that wouldn't be a good move. So what black does is h captures, bishop captures, knight captures, and then queen captures, g4. And then as anticipated, everybody likes to attack the queen. You move the knight, the bishop here, but by moving the bishop to d7, you're allowing the advance of the pawn here, when the whole focus and purpose for this this exercise is to get your pieces, to show how we're going to be attacking your opponent's king. So what white is trying to do is clear these files for this rook to come over to get on his king, keep this bishop available so he can get on his king, and use this knight and use these pawns to break his pawn structure up. So that's what that whole scenario has been all about. And then black does queen to b4, which really doesn't help him, threatening the rook right here. So white has to do rook to g1, helping white, because now the rook is in concert with the queen, which is pointed at that pawn, which is trying to protect that king. The next move is queen to c3. Now, what black is saying is, okay, I'm going to take your rook right here, and that can actually work to white's advantage. So white doesn't really have to worry about that. So this is a sacrifice too, which is beautiful. Knight captures f7. Okay, if the rook takes, queen check, king over, queen to g8, and it's checkmate. So the queen says, all right, I'll take c2, hitting the king, checking him. Rook to g2, threatening the queen, but still working with the queen here to attack the king. So in this instance, black pretty much has lost the game, because if the king captures, then queen here, and that's checkmate. If the rook captures, queen says check. If the rook comes over to block it, queen takes, that's checkmate. If the rook captures, queen takes check, and the king goes over, then moving queen to g8 is checkmate. So in this instance, the queen captures queen, queen captures g2, rook captures f7, pawn captures, rook to g7, and then h6, and black resigned. So the goal was just to apprehend or to capture black's king, to apprehend and to surround black's king. So because at this point, there's nothing, absolutely nothing that black can do. Black has one rook and a king that are defending against two pawns. This pawn duel here can be very, very detrimental, because it's going to require material to stop them. At the same time, white's next move is to move here, and he doesn't have a place to go, so he has to take. When he takes, queen takes check, he moves over, and it's just white has a choice of either advancing this pawn and it being promoted to a queen, or checking him, and when he moves out of check, taking the rook right there. So black resigned at that point. But the point of it is, notice how in that game how white used his pawns to dismantle black's pawn structure. White maneuvered his knights to create piece trades, and he used his rooks to control, and his queen to control the open file, and he used his king to apprehend the piece, and he moved the king so that the rook could control the open file. So chess is like a concert, and whoever can make their pieces work together the best, that's the best chess player. So if there's any lesson today, now notice here, some would say this isn't good chess, because these two pieces aren't even developed, but that game was a very short game, but it was a very good game, and so I encourage you to employ some of those tactics, as long as you follow the rules by developing all your pieces and controlling the center and castling and getting king safety, and being mindful of your weaknesses and your advantages, and mindful of your opponent's weaknesses and advantages, then then I think you'll have success. But in this kind of a game right here,